Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
My guest today is Grant Hauschild, the Assistant Majority Leader in the Minnesota Senate. Senator Hauschild is the last Democrat standing in rural Northeast Minnesota. So we talk about the affordability issues that are on the minds of his constituents and how to address them, as well as his optimism that Democrats can reconnect with and ultimately win back rural voters. We also talk about how the killing of Renee Good and the assassination of former Speaker Melissa Hortman last summer have impacted him and his fellow Minnesotans, his work as co-chair of the Civility Caucus, and why he even got into politics in the first place. I really love this conversation. I hope you enjoy. Senator Grant Hauschild, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you so much for having me.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation. We crossed paths in the night in November at the the New Deal conference, and I was really looking forward to sitting down. So I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And I just want to start. Again, thank you for spending some time with us today. I feel like your state, your beautiful state, has been just in the news lately for so many things. So first of all, my heart goes out to you and your fellow Minnesotans and to, of course, Renee Good and her family. How are people feeling today? We're, talking in the week that you all have sued the administration and the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump's making, noise about coming more into Minnesota. Just, how is everyone feeling there?
I think a lot of Minnesotans feel under threat. They frankly feel a little bit like we're in some sort of dystopian movie where this is just unbelievable to a lot of us. And it's also under the context of what has happened in Minnesota before all of this. Earlier last year, we had the assassination of our Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, and the attempted assassination of Senator John Hoffman, both good friends of mine. And that really, I think, created a situation where Minnesotans realized that political violence was now entering people's homes where they feel safest, right? I mean, they were both had those shootings happen right in their homes. We had the Annunciation school shooting shortly thereafter. There has been a lot of violence. And then, of course, you mentioned Renee Good, and I'm thinking about her family in this moment, but it's really just been a hardship for Minnesotans over and over again, and it feels like it's not letting up. But we are, a diligent people here. We're hardworking Midwesterners. We look out for each other here, whether it's our friends, our family, our neighbors, or complete strangers. We have a Minnesota nice attitude of going out of our way to help each other and have each other's back. And I think in this moment, it's going to prove that Minnesota is a special place where people sort of take hardship and have each other's back in these tough moments. And I think we'll come out stronger, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do love that kind of ethos of Minnesota. My own family's journey came through Minnesota on the Swedish side of my family. So even though I've never lived there, I have this kinship with your beautiful state. To that point, that all of what you said and the political violence with your colleagues, and I'm so sorry for your loss. And then there's been the whole issue with the Somalian community in Minnesota. And I think that, a lot of terrible things have been said today about, I think they're trying to strip, their deportation section away. I guess I'm curious about how, and then there's lots I want to talk about, but, so much of this is happening at the national level. This is like a national conversation. Does it feel different I hear what you're saying about people feeling under threat, but in terms of people coming together or turning against each other in the state, have you seen any difference? Or is it really like we're all looking in and kind of, making this a national story where you all have a different kind of feel?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because Minnesota is really known for being a Democrat state that has created, a government system that does look out for one another, that has that sort of safety net that we are really proud of. You mentioned your Swedish family. We are a Scandinavian heritage state where, we followed our ancestors towards sort of that model of, I think, looking out for one another and having that safety net. And I think there is an effort afront. I don't think it will work, but I do think there is a concerted effort afront to really dismantle that entire idea, to make it so that Minnesota is no longer a state that looks out for our neighbors, that no longer has the safety net that, provides the opportunity for people to grow and prosper economically. And so that's one of my fears. I'm a moderate blue dog Democrat in northern rural Minnesota. And so I often talk about, if I'm a Democrat and I believe in government, it better damn well work for people on the ground. Yeah. And so this is really a challenge for those of us that do believe in government's ability to make a difference in people's lives, to really say, okay, what do we need to do to both address fraud, but not let, the conspiracies and the terrible things that we've seen on the ground with violence continue to sort of go unchecked. And I think there's an ability for leaders to step up in this moment and say, enough. We need real leaders who are going to work together to address fraud and keep our programs intact that look out for one another.
Yeah, that's a super interesting perspective. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more about both about the fact that as Democrats, we have a special responsibility to make government work well, since we believe government can do good things. Yeah. It's much easier to burn the house down than it is to actually make things work. And so I think that that's absolutely right. And I hadn't really given the thought to, as you kind of say, as a case study of dismantling this and picking Minnesota to do that. That's really interesting. I want to talk about where you're from and some of the specific issues you're working on, but staying with this theme for 1 second, I was really interested in seeing that you were a co-chair of the Civility Caucus in Minnesota, which is many years old now, right? Something like 2019 or something. Is that right? So I'm just curious. I've never come across that in any other state. So I'm so curious about what that is, and your involvement and how, if at all, that's changed in recent years.
No, thanks for asking about it. It is something that's really special to me. When I was elected, I had a colleague, Senator Swedzinski out of Eden Prairie, who was at the time the Democrat co-chair of the Civility Caucus, approach me and just say he thought I would be a good, co-chair for that group. And what it's really about is not addressing policy. It's not about bipartisan work in and of itself. What it's about is trying to break down the barriers that are happening in our modern day and in our politics, to try to get to know one another, to understand our commonalities, where we might have similar experiences in our life, to try to just make it so that when we are debating policy on the floor, when we are out in our communities, whatever it might be that we're doing, that we will have had this sort of shared experience of the Civility Caucus to say, we can agree better or disagree better, right? We can have policy debate while not, harming each other's names or using derogatory terms. So that's really sort of the goal of the Civility Caucus. We've done happy hours, we've done seminars, we've done all sorts of bringing in alumni of the legislature to talk about their experience. It's just a really great group, and I love being a part of it.
I love that you're part of that. That's so wonderful. Yeah. So let's move to you and how you kind of got into this business in the first place. You did just announce your campaign for re-election, I think, yesterday. Congratulations. It's very exciting. You'll run for your second term. You are representing Northeast, yes, Minnesota, which is really a rural area. And I'm super kind of interested to see that you are really kind of one of the last Democrats standing in your whole neck of the woods. So I'm curious about both, let's start with maybe how you got into politics. What prompted you to run the very first time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I got involved when I was probably 13 or 14. I grew up in Fargo-Moorhead, right on the border of Minnesota and North Dakota. And I didn't come from a political family, so I didn't have people like encouraging me to get involved or bringing me to political events. And I still remember the look on my mom's face when I said I wanted her to bring me to a labor temple to knock doors for candidates. She's like, you want me to drop you off at what kind of temple to knock doors and sell what? It was totally foreign to her and my family. But I did it, because I think I did believe in this concept of really looking out for your neighbors, and sort of the ideology we had in our community of we all do better when we all do better, as the late Paul Wellstone used to always say. It really resonated with me as a young person. And so I just started knocking doors, getting involved in candidates' campaigns like former Congressman Earl Pomeroy, and eventually U.S. Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who I was lucky enough to become political director for. And then when my wife and I made the move to northeastern Minnesota, I quickly got involved on the city council, and our senator announced his retirement. And I just looked around. I had only been living in northeastern Minnesota for about 3 years, and nobody else was stepping up. And I thought, we can't let this region go completely. We have to fight for it. And I might not, be the perfect candidate, but I'm going to, use my experience working in the U.S. Senate and on city council, and being in the Obama administration to really sort of show people what it does mean to sort of be a blue dog, old school Democrat who does believe in the industries up here, who believes in the people and the labor movement that is so strong up here, and that we can win. And we did. So it was a really successful moment for me.
Did you replace an outgoing Democrat? Was that a Democrat helped the person who retired, or was that a Republican?
It's a little nuanced. My predecessor was Tom Bach, and he was the longtime Democrat majority leader. About 20 years he was in office and had been leader for a decade or so. Ran for governor, things like that. But after the 2022 election, he left the party and became an Iron Range independent. And caucused with the Republicans.
Oh, interesting.
And then, during my race, and I've always had a good relationship with Tom. So when I was a city councilor and when I, working with him, I definitely have always had a great working relationship with him. But he did endorse my opponent during my race as well. So he kind of made the move more so to the Republican side at the end of his career.
Interesting. That I did not know that. I'm glad I asked the question. And it kind of goes to that point about the fact that you are, he may have seen the headwinds about where your district and area was going, and you decided to run as a Democrat. You were a Democrat, obviously worked for Senator Heitkamp, a wonderful woman. So why do you think you were successful as a Democrat? What were you able to do that maybe everybody else was seeing Democrats were not going to do well up there?
Well, I didn't follow the strict party line. I was very clear in my support for the industries in northeastern Minnesota, like mining, like timber, and our paper mills in northeastern Minnesota. I told the steelworkers and the building trades that I was with them 100% in supporting the industries that provide their jobs and the labor organizing rights that they were fighting for, and that I wouldn't deviate from there. And there isn't a politician like that in Minnesota anymore. Either it feels like the Republicans are weak or not there on some of the labor organizing issues that they want, like paid family leave and earned sick and save time and the refinery protection bill we did. Or on the Democrat side, you see a little bit less support for things like mining. So it was a really important distinction for me to make. I also have a lot of campaign experience. I was able to raise the money, run a modern campaign. We got up on TV in a district that has its own TV regional sort of network. And we ran a grassroots, sophisticated door knocking and outreach campaign, got endorsements from all the unions, and got a lot of support locally from city councils and mayors, and just showed them that, you can believe in government's ability to make a difference in your life, but you can also be a supporter of strong private sector industry that support these jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, you grew up in North Dakota, actually, and then before you came to Minnesota, and then worked for Senator Heitkamp. So you really come from, you grew up in these small towns in this rural area. I know you've been a huge champion for small towns and for rural America. What is it that Democrats get wrong about rural America? How and what should we learn from your success?
I think the biggest challenge that I see, at least in a state like Minnesota, is you hear Democrats talk a lot about equity issues, protecting the homeless and passing homeless aid to try to help with that issue, racial equity, religious tolerance, all of these really, really important things that we as Democrats believe in, right? But what I see a real blind spot among Democrats is the equity arguments for our rural communities and rural towns. It really, I think, should be the firm belief of Democrats that your zip code should not determine whether or not you have a quality education, whether your school stays open, whether a rural ambulance can show up and provide life-saving care to you or a loved one, that your rural hospital stays open. And unfortunately, it feels sometimes like Democrats, when passing state or federal policy, think it's one size fits all, that we can just pass these government programs or regulations and, Edina, Minnesota and Ely, Minnesota will be able to figure it out equally. And that's just simply not the case. The capacity in these rural towns, the ability for us to try to keep things status quo, let alone try to grow, is just a different calculation for us. So I've really tried to harp on this idea that we as Democrats should have a rural equity focus and make sure that your zip code doesn't determine your quality of life.
Yeah, well, I could not agree more with that statement. And I think the other thing is, when we talk to New Dealers from different parts of the country and rural areas, there's also this sense that the rural economies are doing, are somehow divorced from, or that people are not feeling the same kinds of things, which I also think is absolutely not true. Right. So I'm really curious to hear from you about what the people in your district are saying to you, what they're feeling, what they're most concerned about. Because I think it's probably not far off from a lot of what other people are feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have rural grocery stores in northern Minnesota that have higher prices than grocery stores in the suburbs because of the distance and the less people there to purchase the goods, but you still want to provide groceries to local residents. I have communities in my district that literally don't have childcare available. So when you're thinking about young people trying to move to a community for a job or to live in the great outdoors of northern Minnesota, and you want our population to grow, how do we do that if I have communities that just don't have childcare access for those young families? We have 650, we just announced another 50 layoffs in our mines. We have 650 steelworkers laid off right now in northeastern Minnesota. What I tell people is we need to extend the unemployment for those steelworkers in that unique industry, because a mine shutting down in northern Minnesota is the equivalent of Target shutting down in the Twin Cities. And when I say Target, I don't mean your retail Target. I mean the corporate Target headquarters shutting down in downtown Minneapolis. The equivalent economic impact of that is enormous. Yeah. People need to understand how reliant we are on those industries and frankly the salaries that those families get from those jobs. So it's a totally different picture.
Yeah, that childcare is really interesting. Before I forget this thought, I saw when Mary Portola announced for Senate this week, which is so exciting and amazing. And but she was talking about grocery prices in Alaska similarly, just because it's so hard to get things to these very remote parts of Alaska. She was saying that when I say that don't quote me, but milk is $19 a gallon or something. She's like, this is not hyperbole. It is actually $19 a gallon. So people do not understand what that does to a community that is having to deal with those prices. So childcare is super interesting. As you think about your role as a assistant leader in the Senate, what do you think needs to happen, particularly on some of those affordability issues? What are you going to be looking at this session?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have the Great Start childcare affordability legislation in Minnesota, which is really our premier childcare affordability bill. The idea being Health and Human Services came out with a study that said, in order to properly provide childcare and encourage growth of families in America, families shouldn't be spending more than 7% of their income on childcare. That would kind of be the ideal situation. So the legislation I have would help subsidize childcare facilities, help subsidize the childcare workforce salaries, and try to make it so that families are not spending more than that 7% on childcare. I think that would be an enormous leap for us in Minnesota to be able to provide that for families and really encourage growth and prosperity in our communities. We saw, for the record, New Mexico Democrats make this change in their state using some extraction industry revenue, to help fund that. And I think about those things as a senator from the area that does have the extraction industries in our region.
Yeah.
How can we look at sort of solving some of these affordability challenges? The other thing I did, just on a particular note for northern Minnesota, we took our mining taxes and for the first time in many, many decades, increased the direct payment to homeowners for their property taxes using mineral taxation. And so rather than just reinvesting and re-incentivizing new industries in our area, we gave it right back to homeowners to try to reduce their property taxes, and it has had a huge effect, in our region. So thinking about ways that we can use sort of these resources to make a big, affordable argument for residents, I think is really important for us as Democrats.
Yeah. Talk to me about healthcare in rural, in your district. And I know that that's something you worked on for a while as well. And, a lot has been made about, the ACA subsidies going away and what that's going to do to rural healthcare and hospital systems. What are you seeing on the ground, and what can we do about it?
What I keep saying is that with the ACA subsidies going away, with the big, beautiful bill that passed Congress, with the Medicaid cuts and the SNAP cuts, this is a direct attack on rural America. No doubt in my mind that the most amount of Medicaid recipients and SNAP recipients are in greater Minnesota, in our rural communities. And a lot of people don't realize that. Our rural hospitals, I have 5 critical access hospitals in my district alone. All of them are majority reliant on Medicaid and Medicare patients. Yeah. So you think about that when you're pulling that rug out from under them. And of course, the ACA subsidies for farmers and independent folks that rely on that marketplace, that's just a huge impact on rural and greater Minnesota. So really talking about sort of the negative effects from the federal government. But then on the state side, something that I've really focused on is the rural ambulance crisis that we are facing in our region and in the state. It's really a triple whammy to me, because a lot of our rural service areas are unprofitable compared to some of the suburbs and regional hubs in our state. So you have private providers or large nonprofits providing and making money on the profitable service areas for ambulance. Meanwhile, the rural towns in greater Minnesota are left to the sort of lowest rung on the ladder, which is this, biggest town in the service area, taking on that license and providing the service as a local government. Well, they're already stretched thin. Their population are on fixed income. They're usually older and more reliant on healthcare services and rural ambulance. And you're adding a property tax statement on top of it to pay for it and keep it afloat in the first place, because it's unprofitable. So it's really another example of rural Minnesota being disadvantaged or having another tax on them because of those challenges. So what I did is I really hammered on this at the state level, made it an equity argument. And for the first time ever, the state of Minnesota is providing tens of millions of dollars to subsidize our rural ambulance services, and making the case once again that your zip code shouldn't determine whether or not you have life-saving care or quality of life.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that some of these conversations are so strange to me in the sense that we start talking about government as a business, right? Well, government, we've got to run government like a business. It's like government exists where the private sector doesn't come in, right? I mean, essentially, there are things where, rural mail, right? It's, yes, it's much more expensive to deliver mail in rural areas. So does that mean people should not get mail if they're in rural areas, or and that's why, so I just find it so interesting. And I also find it interesting, to your point about the fact that your constituents are going to get hit so hard by some of these things, that with the Republicans in control in Washington and Congress and the White House, they purport to speak for these folks. Again, like you're sitting in a place where you're the only Democrat, yet this is going to disproportionately hurt some of these folks. So I guess, how do you square that circle of I know that, President Biden talked a lot about this. We had a lot of New Deal leaders who were from rural areas who were really making the case that Democrats had done a lot more about investing in the rural areas, but it doesn't always seem to translate politically. Like, how do we overcome that?
Well, a couple things. I mean, first and foremost, I really fundamentally believe that the rooster will come home to roost here eventually. At some point, constituents and residents have to actually feel the impact of policy. And unfortunately, with a lot of these big decisions that have happened, you sometimes see it get glossed over by, for example, the transformational healthcare funding that's coming from the big beautiful bill that'll make it more difficult to feel the impacts of those Medicaid cuts until that's pulled out from under you, right? Or having a couple of Democrats in these rural areas, or even the ones in some of the suburban and urban areas, advancing legislation that does provide equitable funding for a lot of these critical government services that people rely on. But I also see something coming down the chute here where you have a lot of ultra right-wing rural legislators in Minnesota, and I'm sure across the country, who just fundamentally believe getting the government out of everything. And once those folks get more and more power, which we're seeing happen in Minnesota, when you don't have state bonding bills passing that disproportionately impact greater Minnesota, or rural ambulance funding legislation getting passed at the legislature, when you see investments in rural education equity passing, in the state legislature, I think these communities are going to start to ask themselves, wait a second, what did I vote for if I don't have a champion who's looking out for my region and my community? So my hope is that people will see that eventually. Unfortunately, what pains me in that is that I fear that sometimes it'll be too late. So that's why I'm really trying to get this message across to people and grow our presence as a Democratic Party in Minnesota, in greater Minnesota, so that they hear our voice and show them what we've done for them.
Yeah. I do not know the answer to this question. I know that you were talking about the extraction industries that are in your district. Do you have a lot of farmers as well, or is that not?
Yeah, I have about 400 farmers based on the Department of Agriculture's analysis. I will say they are not the traditional farms that you would hear about in the Midwest. That's predominantly in the west and southern part of the state. I think some of mine are ranchers, some of them are smaller farms. Certainly a lot of people doing a lot of great work with sustainability and providing local foods. That's definitely a market up here. But in terms of the large scale farms, they're predominantly in other parts of the state.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe just as we wrap up here, I talked a little bit about this. So this session's coming up. We were talking before we came on air that your session starts a little bit later because it's not a budget year. What are you looking forward to as Assistant Majority Leader in the Senate and in the legislature generally? What are you guys going to be focused on? And also, how will things play out given that it's an election year? Do you feel like how will that impact some of the session going forward?
Well, I certainly think affordability will be at the top of our list as a Democratic caucus. Looking at ways to address childcare and healthcare costs in particular, I think are two things that we're really going to be looking at. But the other dynamic is we do have a Republican Speaker of the House who is running for governor. We have a lot of dynamic changes with Governor Walz deciding not to seek a third term, but I still think that there are plenty of legislators running for higher office where the dynamics will be different. It's not a budget year, so we don't have to pass anything. I anticipate there being a little bit more partisanship and a little bit more gamesmanship in terms of the legislative process this year, just given that we are leading up to an election year. I'd be remiss not to address the fraud issue. It is a real concern, and we must do everything we can to address this issue as Minnesotans. And we have in the legislature passed legislation to make it so our agencies can stop payments if they see fraud happening. We've also made it so that our grant making process has a better verification process. But the one bill that I'm most excited about is establishing an independent office of Inspector General in the state of Minnesota. This is something that the state Senate overwhelmingly passed, and unfortunately the tied House could not get across the finish line. But I really think regardless of who the governor is, regardless of what party controls the legislature, we should have an independent office that can really investigate, prosecute, and really determine sort of fraud in our state programs. And hopefully we can get that finished this next session.
Yeah, seems like there should be momentum for behind that. What about the election year? You mentioned it. You've got the governor's race, of course. You've got a Senate race. You've got a lot going on. How are you feeling about Democrats' chances in going forward?
I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. I think word on the street is that Senator Amy Klobuchar is going to return home and run for governor. That would be a massive boon for us Democrats here in the state. It'd allow us to go on offense in greater Minnesota and win, I think, 2 or 3 seats, if not more, in the suburbs of the Twin Cities. I really feel positive that we will go into the 27th session with a trifecta and have some fresh leadership, some fresh eyes at the state level, and can do some really big things here at the state. So I'm excited.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. I'm excited that you're a part of NewDEAL and really looking forward to working with you on some of those affordability issues. And also you really kind of connecting Democrats back to the roots of rural America, which, as you pointed out, should be a big part of our coalition going forward. So I think we've just got to really make this a priority and make sure we show up and that we talk about the issues that people care about. So thank you for your leadership on all of that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to being a part of that as well.
An Honorable Profession is a NewDEAL Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at NewDEAL for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.